And good evening to everyone. I'm Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and this is our Thursday night, 27th of August, Facebook Q&A. Normally we would be doing interview segments at this time, but this week I had the fortune of being able to interview MP Adam Crouch from the New South Wales government earlier today to discuss issues surrounding the Central Coast Airport. If you have not already seen that interview, I really do recommend that you jump in and you take a look, because it's fantastic to see a strong politician standing up and supporting general aviation and being very positive about protecting the Central Coast Airport and working towards a strong future for general aviation in the state of New South Wales. What we thought we would do this evening is to just mix things up a little bit and recognising that many of our members and industry supporters, and those of you right across Facebook and YouTube, would like to potentially put some questions forward, or may even want to put some views, or you may want some comment on issues that you think are important to you with respect to Australia's aviation industry. So we thought we would open up a Q&A session, and to join us this evening for this Q&A session, I've asked AOPA Australia President, Mr. Shawn Kelly, and welcome, Shawn.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Now, this is your first Facebook Live and I guess first public outing as the president of AOPA Australia. So this is a first event, but also we're going to be seeing a little bit more of you over the coming weeks and months, because you're working on some special projects. So I welcome you to tonight's session, and I look forward to some of the comments.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this.
And joining us again is Mary Brown. Mary comes from North Queensland. She's Director of North Queensland Aviation, and she's also a councillor with the Hinchinbrook Council up there. And Mary, you've been with us before, and we welcome you back again, and thank you for giving some time.
Yeah, great to be back, Ben, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute this evening.
That's okay. It's no problem at all. So as I say at the start of all of these sessions, it's an opportunity to have an open and candid conversation about issues that we feel are important to us here in the aviation industry. And tonight, hopefully, what we'll receive is some questions through and some comments from industry participants themselves. But Shawn, maybe the best way to start tonight is for you to give a little bit of a background on your involvement in aviation, and I guess how you became involved in AOPA.
Well, I've been involved in general aviation for probably 20 years or more. I owned a flight school in the US, moved to Australia, worked for a couple of flight schools here. I originally was thinking it would be really nice to work for someone else for a change. You know, if something broke on the airplane, it wasn't going to be my problem. I'd be able to just say, oh, that's too bad. Call me when it's fixed. And turns out I actually enjoy working for myself more than I do working for other people. So I wound up starting a seaplane business on the Sunshine Coast. So I'm currently operating a Loga 80 on floats off of the Maroochy River and enjoying that. But my background is definitely in flight training, and that's, I think, probably my real passion is flight training. And it's been very frustrating trying to deal with the Australian flight training system. And that's one of the reasons that I'm involved with AOPA, is to see if there's some way that we can sort of reinvigorate flight training, especially for general aviation.
Well, we've been quite lucky to have you on board with us at AOPA, and you've been a huge addition to our board of directors. And the thing that I really appreciate most, Shawn, is that you come to us with a great deal of experience of both systems. So you have a very good handle on how the US system functions and works, along with how the Australian systems. And I know, there's been a multitude of conversations that you and I have been part of, where we're always challenged on advocacy items that we might be pushing at the time with CASA, saying, look, the US do it this way and it's so much easier. And they'll, with the response is, oh, no, we can't do it. And I guess it leaves you a little perplexed, because it can be done.
Exactly. And I think that probably is my biggest frustration with all of this. I think sometimes it would be easier for me if I didn't have that experience in the US system, because having worked in that system and seen how easily and how well it works, and then to come here and see how difficult they've made everything, and to compare the two and not be able to see any actual safety benefit is probably the biggest frustration. I think if you could look at the two systems and say, okay, Australia has a lot more red tape, a lot more regulation, but look at how much safer it is, I could get behind that, because I'm definitely very, very pro safety in aviation. I'm probably the world's wussiest pilot. I don't like doing things that are scary. So, yeah, I'm not looking to be a cowboy. I'm not looking to do things that are unsafe, but I really would like to see Australians be able to take advantage of a system that encourages GA.
Well, certainly, Shawn, there's a huge opportunity for Australia with respect to general aviation. And we know that that opportunity is not just the local opportunity, the local airfield, or the state opportunity for business and trade, or the national opportunity with respect to import-export. It is a huge national opportunity to drive strong economic growth and to create thousands of jobs right across the nation. Obviously, your area, you're really strongly focused on flight training. Mary, coming across to you, your interest really centres on aircraft engineering and maintenance, and you have obviously some unique perspectives on this area.
Yeah, I would say definitely aircraft maintenance has been our core business for many years, but living in a rural and regional community, we also have a much broader perspective in understanding the absolute importance that general aviation in particular plays to the social integrity of these rural and remote communities, whether it be from the perspective of agricultural support, freight, charter, natural disasters. GA is absolutely integral to all these rural and regional communities. And probably for me, that's the biggest concern I have, is not only the impact what's currently been happening in the aviation industry for the last couple of decades, what it has on our particular business. And yes, we currently run an aircraft maintenance facility, but we've previously also run a helicopter flying school, done charter work. So we're very familiar with all the other aspects of flying. And Jeffrey's a commercial pilot, both fixed wing and rotary, as well as an aircraft engineer. So we've been across the whole spectrum. But we are most concerned about the impact it's having across the whole of the rural and regional perspective, insofar as the lack of GA and the unavailability of flying within such a vast country of what we are in Australia.
I mean, Shawn, we talk a great deal about the decline of aviation. But, you know, the thing is, when we're actually talking about decline, what we're actually talking about is the enormous loss of economic opportunity and prosperity that not only the aviation industry would enjoy, but it's the loss of economic prosperity for local communities, for cities and regional townships, and for states and the nation as a whole, isn't it?
It is. And if I could just go back to what Mary was talking about, I think one of the things that is amazing to me is that if there was any place in the world that was custom designed for general aviation, it would be Australia. I mean, this is such an incredible place for GA. We have huge open spaces with crappy roads in between. We've got fantastic weather most of the year for most of the country. You don't have huge mountain ranges in the way. You couldn't find a better place for GA. GA ought to be thriving in Australia. It should be going off its nut, and it's not. And I think
how would you compare then general aviation activity here in Australia to, say, the United States?
That's a really interesting question. I was actually, just the other day, I was starting to try to put together some statistics for that. I was looking at the stats for Van Nuys in Los Angeles, which is a GA airport. I'm just trying to see if I still have that information. The number of operations per day at Van Nuys, just one GA airport in the Los Angeles basin, was mind-boggling. I'm just going to see if I can find that. If you want to talk about something else for a second.
Well, I mean, it is an interesting point. I mean, I've heard the anecdotal comments have been made over time that, you know, I've heard people in the industry laughing, saying, wow, you know, what maybe CASA and Air Services feel is busy. If you were to go to Southern California and maybe have a look at the general aviation activity in SoCal alone, chances are there's more activity in that one area than there would be in the entirety of Australia. And so from a perspective of congestion and frequency of operation and everything else, I mean, Australia is really, we are so underperformed on the utility and amenity for general aviation.
Absolutely. You know, even in the smaller areas where I had a flight school at Watsonville in California, and it was not unusual to have 6, 8, 10 airplanes in the circuit on a regular basis, and that was a relatively small airport. Flying in and out of Los Angeles Basin is absolutely mind-boggling. If nobody here in Australia has, if you're here in Australia and you've never done it, it's incredible. I think that the number that's in my mind was 144,000 operations, possibly a week at Van Nuys, and it was just absolutely incredible. So you've got these areas in the States that have unbelievable traffic density. They have really, really healthy GA airports. The GA airports generally are really focused on actual aviation activities rather than what you and I have been finding here, where we're finding more and more councils trying to figure out how to convert their airports into other commercial activities. That doesn't seem to be happening in the States. You do have complementary commercial activities. You have restaurants at the airports. You have maintenance facilities, fuel. And, you know, granted, we don't have the population density here, but we should have a lot more people flying small aircraft. I had the opportunity, when COVID first hit, I had an opportunity to go to Moree down at New South Wales and teach a family down there on a property to fly. And as part of that, when we were doing our navigation exercises, we were going around to different small airports, and every time we'd land, people would come up and they'd start talking to us, and they'd realize that we were on a NavX. They'd say, "Oh, you're an instructor. You're here in the area? That's fantastic. How long are you going to be here? You know, I need a flight review. I've got a friend that wants to learn to fly. I've got this, I've got that." There's no flight training out there. None. And that's the part of the country that really should be, everybody out there should have an airplane. That's the only reasonable way to get anywhere out there.
Well, Mary, you're up in North Queensland. I mean, do you, and just on to Shawn's point there, I mean, you know, are you seeing that aviation is incredibly underutilized? And if it's underutilized, why?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the time that we've been in the industry, and I'll just make the point that I married into an aviation family. It wasn't actually, I inherited this when I married, didn't know it was part of the package, but I've come to love the industry and I'm incredibly passionate about it. And really come to understand how absolutely vitally important it is. And in the last 35 years that I've been involved, the decline that we've witnessed, just literally on the ground, of operators within our region, whether they be flying schools, whether they be charter operators, whether they be maintenance orgs, we are reaching critical mass now. So as we've spoken about here this evening, we are an incredibly vast country, and aviation is so, so critical to keeping those rural and regional communities connected and thriving. And especially now in this post-COVID environment, when we know agriculture and mining is probably going to be the industry sectors that get the economy going again in Australia, there aren't the operators around to support those industries anymore. So, you know, I've always said that no one's really paid attention to the decline in aviation because they haven't really needed us. And when they do need us, it'll be too late, because we've lost the skill set, we've lost the personnel, we've lost the infrastructure investment that should have been happening over the last 30 years. But people quite simply have not invested because they have not had the confidence of the direction of the regulatory reform has been taken within this country. So they've quite simply walked away, and it's really concerning that they are. Well,
Mary, this is a really good juncture to throw our first question this evening from a member of ours. Actually, it's an AOPA Australia member, Ben Hardy, and he says, "Hey Ben, thanks for the hard work on Warnervale alongside the Aero Club. My big passion is trying to get alignment between the CASA regulations and the FAA ones." There you go, Shawn. Do you think there is any passion in CASA to actually do this? Let me throw that first to you, Shawn, and then we'll go to Mary. Do you think CASA have the passion to sort this mess out, and do you think that they will give a fair run at really looking at whether these US regulations can in fact solve some of these problems?
It's hard to, it's obviously hard to get into the minds of other people, but I certainly haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that they were really excited about trying to adopt the US regulations. Now, CASA has obviously been working for quite a while now on aligning, which I believe is their terminology, the CASA regulations with the FAA. What it seems to me, though, when I'm looking at what's actually happening, is what we're doing in Australia is we are taking the numbers of the regulations from the US and saying, rightio, Part 61 in the US, we're going to adopt Part 61 and we're going to talk about the same things in Part 61 that they do in the US. And that's sort of the extent of it. They are adopting the number system, but I'm not seeing a lot of adoption of the actual philosophy or the actual regulations themselves. And I'm not sure how much of it is due to sort of the actual cultural background here. For example, when I first came to Australia, I was working on converting my US commercial license to an Australian one. And I got in touch with a flight school on the Sunshine Coast, and they told me what I basically needed to do. And one of the things obviously I needed to do was to pass the air law exam. So I live an hour and a half north of the Sunshine Coast, so rather than worrying about going down and buying a copy of the regulations, I thought, well, I'll just look stuff up online. I'll do some online practice tests, and when I think I'm good to go, I'll head down there and I'll do my test. So I spent a bit of time studying and doing practice tests, and I thought, yep, I've got it. I called the flight school up, talked to the lady who was the course coordinator, and I said to her, I'm ready for my air law exam. If you could set that up, that'd be great. She said, well, have you taken our highlighting and tagging class? And I said, well, what's that? She said, well, that's, we go through, we teach you, what areas to highlight in the regulations, what things you need to tag, and, all these things. I said, well, I'm pretty proficient at using an index. I think I'm probably going to be okay. She says, well, have you at least highlighted and tagged your regulations? I said, well, I haven't actually bought them yet. I was going to pick them up on the way to the test. And she said, what? I said, yeah, I'm going to pick them up on the way to the test. I'm an hour and a half away. It just seems like the easiest way to do it. She said, have you talked to the CFI about that? I said, no. She said, well, you better talk to him. So she actually went off and talked to the CFI, and the CFI said, that's fine. If he thinks he can do it, go for it. So she came back. She said, well, the CFI said that to go ahead and set you up for the test. She said, but I really think that you should come in and do a tagging and highlighting class. I said, no, I'll be fine. So she set the test. I left early enough to be able to pick up the books on my way down. So I pulled into the pilot shop, went up to the front desk and said, right, I talked to you earlier. I just need to pick up a copy of the regs. And the guy walks back to the back room, comes out and dumps this big pile of books on the bench. I said, well, no, I just need the part of the regs that you need to know to be a pilot. I don't need all the rest of it, just the stuff that pertains to being a pilot. He said, yeah, that's it. This is it.
That's crazy.
And that'll be $900, please. I said, what? He said, yeah, it's $900. I said, that's insane. Because back in the States, what I'm used to is I'm used to looking at the FAR-AIM, which is the Federal Aviation Regulations, and the Airman's Information Manual, which has got all kinds of interesting stuff in it, like, what all these signs at the airport mean. If you're going to Alaska, make sure you take a gun. All this, interesting stuff. And that book, one book, is about the size of a large paperback. It's probably, don't know.
We had one of
40
these,
mil
Shawn,
thick.
when we did the General Aviation Summit. We had that
Yes,
table
you
set
did.
up for the Deputy Prime Minister to see, where we had all of those bloody regulations in their binders, and that one really neat book from America that summed the whole problem up.
That's it. And the book is $14.95. Now, if you buy it early and you go through 40s, you can probably get it for $10.95. But at the end of the year, you throw the book away. You go down, you buy another book for $14.95. Good to go for the year. And importantly, there's an index in the back. So if you want to know what, if you have a question about a law, you go to the index in the back and you look it up, and then you flip through, and there's your answer.
Crazy thing, that index. It's a miracle.
Crazy. It's crazy. Australia doesn't have an index. They don't even, if you're taking the test, they won't even allow you to take a commercially available index in with you, which I don't understand. I don't understand why you would have a set of regulations that had no index. I've never heard of this. And then we've got the CAOs, which were really a surprise to me, because if you look something up in the regs, for example, dropping something from an airplane, it says you can't do it. And somehow you've got to intuitively know that there's this other book over here that is probably going to contradict that. It doesn't say you can't do it except as specified in CAO, blah, 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 blah. It just says you can't do it. This is insane. What kind of regulation is that?
To bring this back to Ben's question, and Ben,
sorry,
Ben, I guess, no. I think it's actually the explanation that you've given really is a great summation, because there is a real philosophical difference between the way that CASA analyzes a problem clearly and how maybe the US FAA have approached it. And I mean, I say this all the time. I'm certainly no expert on it, but it sums it up entirely that the US thinking is, let's simplify the process and ensure that a pilot has access to the information that's necessary and relevant. Whereas the Australian system is, no, we want you to be proficient in the entire regulatory framework, and we're going to test you to that.
Exactly. And I do think also, though, and this is one of the things that occurred to me as I was going through, this big stack of books. I think one of the other differences is a basic difference in sort of regulatory philosophy. In the US, as a citizen, you are the sovereign. You have the right to do whatever the hell you want to do unless there's a rule against it. If there's a law against it, you can't do it. In Australia, it seems like we have the right to do whatever the Crown says we can do. And so rather than having, and I think that that's a key, because rather than having a small book of things that you can't do, we have a whole stack of books telling us what we can do. And I think that is one of the hurdles that we face in getting the FAA type system adopted here in Australia. So just
maybe
if we design
a brief for CASA that's incredibly convoluted and complex and has no index, they'll understand it.
It could be good.
Just while you're talking there, Shawn, a comment has just arrived.
Yep.
Just very quickly, Jessie's just put a comment there that says, I did some of my flight training in the United States. Honestly, being there seriously highlights on how far back Australia really is in aviation. And I'm going to throw this across to Mary quickly, because we've got about 6 or 7 other really poignant questions here we'd like to try and get to. And I know you and I, Shawn, once we get started on these issues, you and I could talk for days on it. Probably why we're perfect for representing general aviation pilots. We could probably bore the regulator into submission. Mary, the question from Ben Hardy is obviously about being able to get CASA to really look at with merit the US system and find ways in which it can actually adopt that. And I use the word adoption rather than harmonisation, because I think in Australia harmonisation has really, it's been bastardized quite a bit. They'll say there's a harmonisation, but the reality is you ask for an apple and they give you an orange. How do you see this from a maintenance and engineering perspective?
Yeah, Ben, look, there's probably quite a lot of your audience that would remember the time when we in Australia were so close to adopting the FAA regulations that we literally had started converting across. Now, I'll give you our own personal experience. So we're an organisation that is PNG Part 145 approved. And while we were going through that process, and look, I lose track of time, but I'm going to say probably 15 years ago, whilst we were undertaking that process to get PNG 145 approved, the Australian regulations, we had been notified as maintenance organisations that Australia was going across to the FAA system. So as a business owner and looking at how we were going to move forward, make investment in our business, continue to grow and thrive, we decided at the time that we would prepare and submit our application for Australian 145 under the FAA system that we had all been told was coming. We actually had submitted our application to our local CASA office to be first cab off the rank when these regulations came through. Well, lo and behold, we'd spent all the money, we'd made the application, we'd prepared our business to move into that place. Then we were told that no, CASA had changed its mind and we were no longer going to the FAA system. We were now going to adopt EASA. And a few of us said, well, hang on a minute, EASA doesn't have any GA, what about us? And we were told, no, don't worry, it'll all be sorted, trust us, we will find a way to make it work. Well, I have to say that history has actually shown that that probably wasn't terribly accurate. So you can hear from my cynicism and understand that I am sure there is a lot of people in the industry exactly in our position where we have tried to be proactive. We've tried to implement good business practices, to try to be ahead of the curve, to prepare ourselves to take advantage of opportunities. And the regulator has let us down badly by not giving us clear, concise, and thorough regulations that we can invest in. And that's the biggest part of why we've got a challenge within GA at the moment, in my personal opinion. People do not.
Well, Mary, I'll jump in here, and again, I'm just going to be conscious of time, and I know that you guys gave up your nights at last minute for us to do this open Q&A, and I thank everyone. The questions are rolling in here. We are going to get to as many of them as we can. Shawn, you would be aware, as I had an opportunity to brief our board today, around about mid-morning, I received a telephone call from the chairman of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail of that conversation here this evening, but I'd like to make a couple of comments. I honestly believed when that phone call came through that when I answered the phone call, I was going to hear the chairman of CASA saying, look, we understand that AOPA has been running a lot of interviews of recent, and they're very public, and we would like to meet with AOPA, and we'd like to meet with the people that have been raising concerns to better understand this. That's what I thought the phone call was about. But I very quickly learned that that phone call was not about that at all. The phone call was basically to chastise effectively myself for doing these broadcasts and alleging that everyone that's come on this program to date has only been giving half truths. And I find it incredibly frustrating because, Mary, you and I know each other. We've done a little bit of work. We've now done a little bit of work here in the industry, and you know, aviation in Australia is actually a very small industry. It's not very big. We all know pretty much who all the main players are, and I have to say this on the whole that, and I said this to Tony Matthews today. I said, I in all of my travels across the industry, I really can honestly say that I have not really run into an organisation where I've walked away thinking, my God, they are just going out of their way to break every rule in the book. What I have seen is I have seen a growing frustration within the Australian general aviation industry that appears to be born from the fact that CASA just don't listen. Now, one of the accusations that was made to me by the chairman of CASA was that I don't use my ears enough and I use my mouth too much. And my response to that was, well, I've actually sat down and I have talked to these people who've brought their issues forward, and I have listened to the issues that they've brought forward, and we've tried to provide a voice for them. Have you? Because in just about every one of these issues to date, and there are more coming, as you know, as you'd be aware, Shawn, we've committed to doing a weekly broadcast, and each week we're going to be interviewing another industry participant who's been having issues right across the entire industry. And in just about all of those, they're saying that I've written to the board, I've either not been given an audience or I've been allowed to write a letter, but no one will really sit down with me. And as I've said to Tony Matthews today, I've said, Tony, do you not understand that the frustration being shown by the industry is not because we hate CASA and we find that this fun. Mary, if I dare would say, I know if I speak on behalf of you and say, I don't think you find it fun. And Shawn, I know you don't find it fun, and I know I don't find it fun. And I actually made the comment to Tony today. I said, Tony, you are aware this is not an entertainment program. This is not done for entertainment. We don't broadcast this for the sake of families tuning in at 7 o'clock to watch their favourite sitcom, the AOPA sitcom. It's not a sitcom. It's a very serious broadcast that is detailing that there is a growing frustration within the industry, and the general feeling is that CASA is not listening. And so, when I hear you talk about the issue of being asked to be first in line and to put that work and effort, I mean, that's obviously cost your company money. You're physically giving your time, you're focusing your business resources, and you are trusting that when the regulator says we're changing these rules and we want you to come with us, that when you get to that point, there'll be an outcome delivered. And clearly what has been happening time and time again across the last 30 years, there seems to be this ongoing bastardization of regulation until we've gotten to a point now where, Shawn, it's so complicated, it is so convoluted that we are unable to work with it. And it really does appear from the conversation that I had today that CASA's interpretation of the industry's frustration is that we're all liars. We're somehow all liars because we're not telling them what they want to hear. And in fact, there was a very telling comment that was made during that conversation, because I said to Tony Matthews, I would have thought that as the chairman of CASA, you would have understood that these interviews were an opportunity to bring the industry to the table, to have a meaningful conversation and discussion so that we can actually solve some of these problems. And I was told, well, Ben, you don't know how things work. When you attack us, we won't work with you. If you are out there attacking us and we don't like that, well, we're going to basically not respond. And I kind of was very surprised. And Shawn, I called you straight after that phone call to basically say, what the hell was all this about? CASA are there to support us. And I think we would all agree that we all need a productive working safety regulator to support our industry and to help us move the industry forward and to succeed and to grow. But how can we work if we have a regulator that when they don't like what they hear, they just say, well, I'm not going to work with that person now. I don't like what Ben Morgan is saying on behalf of the members of AOPA who are desperately seeking change and reform to unlock opportunity for the industry. So we'll treat him like he doesn't exist, and we'll just refuse to acknowledge that the problems are there. And if we are forced to acknowledge it, we'll accuse the individuals of giving half-truths, not being honest, and that, so on and so forth. And I can continue with it. I mean, Shawn, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, as we spoke about earlier, I think one of the points that was made was that with any business, if you make people upset with you, then they're going to not want to deal with you. The business is not going to want to deal with you. And I think that one of my points that I made to you is that CASA is not just another business, and we're certainly not out to antagonize CASA. I have no desire to, sort of provoke them. But at the same time, I think that we need to be able to express what our concerns are without worrying about the fact that we're going to create a situation where CASA doesn't want to deal with us anymore just because they perceive that we are somehow attacking them. And that's certainly not our intention. What we want is we would like to get some changes made. And I think that the frustration really does come from the fact that we have, as an industry, for years been trying to get changes made, and we're just not really seeing changes. We're seeing changes, but we're not really seeing changes that are necessarily what we're trying to accomplish. And I think, again, what we really need to see is I think most of us would really like to see us adopting the U.S. regulations as far as possible here in Australia without changing every single thing that they do. We adopt supposedly the U.S. regulations in some areas, and then we change everything so that we wind up with something that's never been tried anywhere.
As I say, Shawn, the Franken regulation. The Franken regulation.
That's right.
It's alive, but not quite.
That's
now,
exactly
Mary,
right.
I'm going to shoot it back. I'm going to shoot it back to Mary because I used you as an example there, in terms of your business has responded to these regulatory changes, and you obviously, I'd like to use the word you're forced to make the changes, but effectively you are forced. I mean, when CASA decide to change their mind and head in a direction, we often know that it's forced, and there's no better example than what's happened with Angel Flight to see just how aggressive the regulator will be to achieve its ends, even when everybody in the industry knows it doesn't make sense and there isn't a safety case to support it. They're going to ram it through. Obviously, when your business is faced with these massive changes and you invest and you get to the end of it and then suddenly it's not what it's said to be, do you feel that CASA give you a fair opportunity to talk to them about it and that they genuinely want to even hear it?
So the answer to that is no, because unfortunately we have a situation where the regulator makes the rules, and we in industry, we have an obligation that we have to comply to continue to remain in business. And I have to say, Ben, that when I speak about CASA, I'm speaking about the organisation. We've talked about this a lot. There are a lot of amazingly helpful and great people that we work with on the ground in CASA. And I really hate those guys being caught up in this tag of CASA, but unfortunately it's the reality. The other thing that I'd just like to make the point, which seems to continually get lost more and more, is that the regulator, their role is to make the regulation, administer the regulations. It's business who does business. Without the small businesses out there, the large businesses, all kinds of aviation businesses, there is no aviation industry. And then without an aviation industry, there is no requirement for a regulator. And I think that often gets lost in the thinking of a lot of government agencies and bureaucracies. We as in the business community, are the ones that will make this aviation industry happen. The regulator's role, as I said, is to set the rules and guidelines. And then basically it would be really nice if they would just let us get out of the way and let business do business. And I know that we keep getting told all these regulations are required for safety's sake. Well, I've been in the industry a long time now, and I would argue that we're possibly a lot less safe now with this overburdensome regulation than we were when I first came into it in the 80s, because there was a culture of safety. That culture can't be forced down your throat with over-regulation. It's about working with your industry sector to foster and mentor that culture of safety. And I think that also gets missed when this whole cumbersome regulation reform is being rolled out.
Okay, we've covered a bit on CASA there, and I think, again, I would mirror the comment there, Mary, though. I really do feel sorry for the hard-working people within CASA that are trying. And I know there's a lot of people inside of CASA that reach out confidentially to speak to me through the week on things that are happening inside of the regulator, because people feel that the system is failing. It's failing the industry, and they are desperately worried that the industry is going to be destroyed and that the damage will be too significant to be repaired from. And I commend those individuals. I commend the individuals inside of CASA that take the time to reach out, because it shows there is a heart and soul within CASA. There are people who genuinely do care, and I'm optimistic that we can get to a future point where there is a board and there is a senior management team and a middle management team that harness that, because that's when the Australian aviation industry will actually start to grow, when the entire organisation really focuses on what are the impacts of our regulation on industry. Are we actually improving safety? And are we making aviation accessible? And are we making the lives of the aviation businesses tolerable so that they can grow and succeed? And I think we'd all agree, if the businesses can't grow, if the businesses can't make money, then they can't employ people. And if they can't employ people and make money, then they go out of business. If they go out of business, we have no industry. So what is the point of CASA if its entire purpose is to put itself out of business? It does not make sense. It seems to me that there is a real incentive here to get this right. Shawn?
I don't think that they are intentionally working on pushing GA out of business, but I do think that sometimes there is a real disconnect in terms of really understanding how GA works. It seems to me like one of the things that they're trying to do is they're trying to sort of, I think that they're, in their defense, they are trying to make aviation as safe as it can possibly be. And I think that from my perspective, what it looks like is that it appears that the way that they're trying to do that is to try to regulate GA just like the airlines, which I guess in some degree makes sense. I mean, airlines are very, very safe.
Well, Shawn, just to that
especially
point, it's important. Shane Carmody did sit in front of the Senate inquiry at some point in time, and I'm sure I can reference the video and link it in the comments in the days to come. But he did sit there, and I was near horrified when he said this. He said, I'll try and paraphrase it. It was something to the effect of, "It has always been a goal of CASA to bring general aviation up to airline standards," and it was in relation to general aviation charter operators. And so it is a fact that they are, in fact, trying to drag small aviation up to a standard that quite possibly is not sustainable. It is not achievable because they place such onerous overhead on this sector that it will actually damage the sector more than it will do any good to it.
Well, I think that if they continue in that direction, it's not going to damage the sector. I think it's going to destroy the sector.
Correct.
It's not feasible for general aviation to, I guess, even just the paperwork involved is not feasible for GA. I was having my airplane worked on at one point, and the company that was working on my airplane was trying to adhere to what their understanding of the direction that CASA was going. And they were, every single part that they took off the airplane in the process of doing the repair had to have a part number, which meant that they had to pull the part off, then they had to go to the manual, and they had to look up the part number for that part. And then they had to document that they had pulled this part number off of this airplane at this time and set it aside, and then go for the next one. Well, I guess possibly in an airline environment that makes sense, but all it did in my case was triple the cost of the maintenance. And you can't. GA is operating on a very, very thin margin as it is. We can't afford to pay triple the cost just to comply with paperwork when there's no discernible benefit.
And just on that point, though, Shawn, is that obviously this process was underway, that there's all this onerous paperwork going on. Did you raise this with CASA? What kind of response did you get when you started to raise these issues?
I actually didn't raise those particular issues with CASA. I've raised other issues. We had, when I first was putting my airplane into the water, I was planning to launch it from a trailer because that's how you do it. I've got an airplane on straight floats, and in the States and in Canada, they put planes on floats in the summertime, take them off floats in the wintertime, back and forth, back and forth. And so the standard procedure in the States and in Canada, when you put the airplane back on floats, in order to get it into the air and then get it into the water, you put the airplane on a trailer, you tow the trailer down the runway. When you're going fast enough, you pull back, you launch, and you fly away. So that was what I was planning to do. And it didn't occur to me that I needed to get permission from CASA to do this because there was nothing in my flight manual that said I couldn't. And again, my mindset being coming from America, if it didn't say that I couldn't do it, I could. And again, this is standard procedure. And so I got a call from CASA. They proactively called me about a week or so before I was ready to put the airplane in the water. And they said, "Hey, we hear this is what you're going to do." I said, "Yeah, that's right. That's how we do it." And he says, "Is there a procedure in your flight manual for doing that?" I said, "No, but there's nothing that says I can't." He said, "No. He says, if it doesn't say you can, you can't. So unless there's a procedure in your flight manual, you can't do it." I said, "Well, my aircraft..."
That comes back to that statement you've made earlier, Shawn, which is one of the most fundamental differences between the US system and the Australian is that the US system does not go about telling you what you can't do on a regular basis. It's more about getting you going and making things happen. Conscious of time, I'm just going to read through a couple of the questions that have been put through here, and then I'm going to direct a question back to the panel here. Doreen Newman from down in Victoria. G'day, Doreen. Doreen says, when do you think there will be an equitable system of aviation medicals, in particular in relation to the disparity between RPC and RPL requirements? Probably to kick that off, Doreen, look, this is one of the biggest furphies that's ever been pulled on the Australian aviation industry as far as I'm concerned. And it really is a furphy. I've said it before, and again, I'll let you two respond however you like, but you're either fit to fly or you're not. Your medical does not know about the aeroplane, and the aeroplane really doesn't know about your medical. The only thing that should stop a pilot from flying an aircraft, if you are fit to fly, is simply whether you are trained to fly that aeroplane or not. And so this idea that there's somehow a difference between recreational pilots and private pilots, there's a difference between a recreational pilot who flies a Technam and a private pilot who flies a Piper Cherokee, it's just a nonsense. And it's a nonsense propagated by CASA because, let's face it, the truth of the situation is that the current medical system is all about economic regulation. It is regulation to steer pilots into the RAOs to ensure that the RAOs are collecting membership dues to prop up the organisation and its balance sheet. And I know it's controversial, and I know I've been attacked by no end of individuals for saying it, but just because you want to attack me doesn't mean it's wrong. That is exactly what's going on, and it shouldn't be going on. Shawn, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that there is, I think that it's even stranger than that, because with a lot of the RAA's aircraft, they can be registered either VH or RAAs. So you have a situation where you've got two airplanes that are literally identical, and one pilot needs a medical and the other one doesn't. It's the exact same airplane. Ridiculous. Except for the numbers on the side. So like I said, I think it's a little bit crazier even than what you said.
Well, Shawn, I think it's embarrassing for CASA, and I'd say this. I've said this. In fact, I've said it to Tony Matthews. It is embarrassing for CASA. It's embarrassing because there is no justification for why they continue to deny pilots who hold an RPL and a PPL from flying on a self-certified medical. And I would say this. Think about this for a minute. It's all about risk, I'm told. It's all about risk. Or we can't have those private pilots flying around a self-certified medical, flying outside controlled airspace with one passenger. That would be dangerous. So let's look at the risk profile. You are saying, CASA, that a private pilot who is trained to the industry's highest recreational standard is a higher risk than an RPC, a certificate holder trained to the industry's lowest standard to fly outside controlled airspace with one passenger. I would defy anyone, I would welcome anyone to put that risks statement and case in writing and submit it so that I could have it peer reviewed by experts. And I've asked CASA for 4 years to answer that one fundamental question, and they will not answer it. And I think it's actually quite disgraceful that they haven't answered that question, because CASA created regulation that has denied RPL and PPL holders the right to access that medical. And through denying them that right, they have forced the participants out of our industry into a system where they're exposed to fees and charges that do not exist under the government system. And I think that that's wrong. And I think it really strikes to the heart of how low CASA have sunk in relation to aviation safety regulations and standards. Because again, and I know it's, people go, oh, he's so inflammatory. No. I'm just trying to state some facts here. CASA's only job in the Australian aviation industry is to inform both government and the industry of what is safe and what is unsafe. And their only function is to promulgate what is safe into regulation so the industry can use it. But what they've done with RAOs should never have occurred. They've allowed their regulatory powers to be abused and to be used to create an economic outcome for a singular corporate organisation. And they've denied pilots who are trained to the industry's highest standards the right to fly on that medical. And it is wrong. And I am surprised I am actually really surprised that recreational pilots across the entire industry have not stood up and been heard on this issue, because everyone has been lied to. And it is a lie. And I know, Shawn, you're sitting there going, oh, it's strong language. It's a lie. And it really should be ended. And CASA should be delivering that standard. Mary, do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, look, it's an incredibly controversial conversation, and I think you've covered off on it really well, Ben. But I'd also like to add another perspective, which often gets overlooked. There is a big sector of the GA industry that will not go across to RAOs because it's their prerogative to choose not to. However, they've been given such a difficult time because of the medical process where their DAME has signed them off. The medical professional who's got all the authorizations that CASA puts in place to appoint that person and say, you are the person that we give permission, we give authority to assess that candidate when they walk into your practice. The DAME has signed off on them. So they've submitted their application for a medical down to CASA, and it gets rejected because someone sitting in an office a couple of thousand kilometres away deems that this is a high risk. And we've got clients that have spent many thousands of dollars going to specialists at the behest of CASA, not because the DAME who sat across the room from them and did the tests said there was an issue, but because the medical sector down within CASA have deemed that there's a problem. And some of these pilots have been out of the air for months, years, trying to prove themselves to be fit, only to sometimes have to walk away, sometimes to fight the good fight to get their license back for maybe 12 months and then start the whole process again. This is why we're losing good people out of our industry. It just gets too hard. They walk away.
Well, Mary, I was approached just this week. I was approached by a private pilot just this week who has spent, a commercial pilot who has spent the last 5 years fighting to get their medical returned to them because of they had experienced a stroke event. Now, this person fully acknowledges that in the aftermath of the stroke event, that they totally expected that there would be a period of time in which CASA would expect that there would be some monitoring to ensure that there's a low chance of recurrence. And as has been explained to me, this poor bastard, if he'd been in the American system, he would have been flying within 2 years. The American system allows that within 2 years you can get back to flying. But this poor bastard had to endure 5 years of nonsense to get flying. And as he said to me, he said, Ben, I had some of the best specialist advice supporting my case to CASA. And he said, and I had staff members within CASA AvMed who are purely a GP overruling specialists and ignoring specialist reports and refusing to act on a specialist report. He said, if you have a look in the United States, he said in the United States, the regulator is supported by panels of expert specialists. They actually go away and get expert specialists involved. But in Australia, they have a complex case management meeting and they have a pool of GPs that are looking at it. He said he found so many inconsistencies with the process. Now, he actually contacted me and he said, I'd like to come on your program and I'd like to publicly talk about it and share all the information that I learned in my experience because it needs to change. And again, I'd go back to Tony Matthews and I would say, I dare say he's not coming on to give us a half-truth. He wants to come on because he wants to see CASA improve. He wants to see the regulator get it right so that we can get people back into aviation and get our industry working. Shawn?
Yeah, I think that, in thinking about the beginning of your statement there, the one part that I don't think that I would necessarily agree with is that that CASA is purposely trying to push things to RAAs, or that RAAs has done anything untoward in gaining the things that they've gained for their pilots. I think RAAs has done a really good job of advocating for their pilots. And I think that it is more a case with CASA that they are, again, trying to make sure that everything is as safe as they can possibly make it. But there needs to be I think, a situation where they're looking at what the actual statistics are rather than worrying about what they're afraid of. I would be very interested to see a comparison of statistics between the U.S. and Australia. I think that we have an opportunity there to see, if these regulations make sense. Is there actually a case for it based on the actual statistics? Is there a case to be made for the fact that there are there more RAA's pilots that are having serious medical issues while they're flying that cause them to crash? And I'm I haven't looked at all the stats, but I don't believe that that's actually the case. It'd be very interesting to me to know if that was true. If there are a significant number of RAA's pilots that are having heart attacks and falling out of the sky, and then you can look at the RPL pilots and go, yeah, but see the RPL guys, they've got to have a medical, and so that's not happening. Okay, fair enough. But again, if we're looking at people flying the same exact airplane with different numbers on the side, then it makes no sense at all to me.
Well, Shawn, one of the most important things I heard you say there was that there needs to be a strong case. Now, one of the things that I don't understand, and Mary, I guess that you would reflect on this as well, with changes to the charter industry rules, changes to the maintenance industry rules, and changes to the flight training industry rules. On the issue of medicals, when the original private pilot medical reform consultation process started and CASA had gone through that process, there's a few things I would note from that. One of the things was that, if everybody remembers, AOPA did a very big petition across the industry to obtain signatures of support for a change. And I think we had 2,000 or 3,000 signatures of support. I'd need to check the number, but off the top of my head, we'll call it 2,000 or 2,500 signatures. We submitted the 2,500 signatures of support as part of the public consultation. And I got a letter back from CASA saying, we're going to note that AOPA put a submission in, but we're not going to mention that there was 2,500 signatures of support for reform because they were all from AOPA on one petition, which I thought was wrong. And that's an issue that I think needs to be fixed. On consultation, CASA need to be genuine. If 2,500 people respond and say, we need to do this, just be honest and include that in there so that those reviewing the consultative packages for that change have an honest appraisal of just how much support and weight was there for it. The second thing that was in it was that in the lead up to these changes on private pilot medicals, we on numerous occasions, I mean, I lost count on how many times we wrote to CASA saying, can you provide your safety case? Can you please provide the industry the safety case on which you are basing your decision to refuse to provide a self-certification medical standard for private recreational pilots in this country? It has never been put forward. It has never been put forward. CASA have never put it on the table. And they were asked in multiple Senate inquiries, did you do a safety case? And I've never seen it provided. Now, it's one of the basic fundamental tenets of the development of regulations in the aviation industry is that they're supposed to develop changes based on data, based on fact. So if we look at the introduction of the basic Class 2 medical standard and the fact that they refused to deliver self-certification, they delivered a Class 2 basic, it had all these restrictions in it. Where was all the underpinning data that said that it was dangerous to give this industry that self-certification medical? What did they rely on in finally arriving at their outcome? Now, to further amplify that point, we had a comment that's come through from Joel Sinclair. And whilst it's on a different issue, it's actually a very important point. And Joel says, well said, Ben. Unfortunately, CASA does not communicate well. Communication is a two-way process. Stepping outside of the GA examples for a moment, but a perfect example is the most recent changes to the Part 139 airports regulation framework. Industry engagement by CASA existed. However, very limited feedback was taken on board, and of the feedback considered, it was on superfluous points, and in the end, CASA blindly followed ICAO. My apologies for this, for those who fully endorse ICAO. I mean, Mary, we've had this discussion around changes that were recently implemented. Shawn, you and I have had this discussion to death. I mean, CASA genuinely appears not to actually really take into consideration what the industry wants, but continues on path to simply deliver what they want. Mary?
Well, I think
yeah, absolutely. The consultation process that we keep getting told, industry consultation, there is a feeling within the industry that it's reached a point where you're wasting your time even making a contribution to the consultation process, because whatever is submitted is never taken on board, it's never implemented, and it feels to the rest of the industry that we're just quite simply going through the process. And I know the feedback when I've spoken to representatives of CASA and said, like, the industry is frustrated. We've had years and years and years of regulatory reform where we've been consulted, and we are just burnt out with responding and feeling like our responses are never, ever being heard because we're not seeing it translate to the regulations. And that's part of the biggest frustration. The Part 138 MOS was a classic example of a consultation process that was quite simply seemed to be a box-ticking exercise. Now, I know that there were a large amount of people did respond to that, and only because there was quite a few people got together and realised how important it was to actually garner that support and get the industry to come on board and make those responses to the consultation process. We're still waiting to see if those responses will be taken on board.
Shawn, do we have a case that industry no longer have confidence in that consultative framework? Is industry burnt out, and do we just have a general lack of faith that the feedback that we're providing means anything to CASA?
Well, it certainly would appear that way. I mean, based on all of the input that we're getting, I'm not finding anyone that we've been talking with that are members of AOPA that have come to us and said, hey, CASA, I made these comments to CASA and they really took it on board, and I'm so impressed. I'm thrilled to death with the direction it's going, and there may be people out there that feel that way, but we're not hearing from them. And I think that possibly part of the problem may be that if CASA is trying to move strongly towards ICAO, they've got that idea in their mind that that's the direction that they need to go. And obviously, as you mentioned much earlier, the big problem with that is that general aviation in Europe and general aviation in Australia are two completely different animals. For the most part, GA in Europe is completely unworkable. So decimated. From a GA standpoint, it is. From a GA standpoint, I don't understand why they would model things on or try to go towards the direction of a system that absolutely does not work for general aviation, rather than in the direction of one that does work. Obviously, the flying in the U.S. is much, much more similar to the type of flying that we're going to have here in Australia, and it just seems to me like that would make the most sense, is to follow the model that's most similar to what we actually have here in Australia, rather than somehow thinking that just because the Europeans do it, it's better. It may be fine for Europe, but it certainly isn't fine for a country like the US or for a country like Australia.
Okay, so we've been at this for an hour. I'm going to throw the last set of questions to you both, and we'll wrap up for tonight. And for everyone that's put questions and comments in, keep them going. And what I'm going to do is, I think that what we've shown is that this is a really good format to take some questions and to flesh out some conversation. And I have to say that I keep repeating this, but this is the best thing that we as an industry can be doing right now. Social media has given the aviation industry the opportunity to start having a national conversation about issues. It's not just here as a vehicle to attack, but it's here to discuss and to highlight and to put forward ideas and to start generating, I guess, solutions to some of these problems. And so I think that, for our members and for our industry supporters, I'd really encourage as many of you as possible to share links to these videos, get it out amongst your friends, because the best thing that we can be doing as an industry right now is broadening our audience as far and as wide as possible, so that the politicians and the government system itself starts to take some notice. And I think, just by way as a demonstration, I'm looking across at some of the analytics from the interviews that we've been doing, and it would really surprise people just how big the audience has become. And the interview that we did with Dasal Avionics, which was the last in-depth interview that we did, that went out to a total reach of 53,956 and has had 8.3 thousand views. Our video that we did on reforming CASA, the key to sport aviation, 45,094 people reached and has had 6.9 thousand views. The industry alert, CASA demanding data from community service flight operators. Just that little alert alone, 9,333 people reached, 3.7 thousand viewed. Going a little bit further down the list, Glenn Buckley, the detailed and bloody tragic story that Glenn Buckley shared with us online. 79,707 people reached, 18,000 views. This is a very powerful medium.
How many licensed pilots are there in Australia, do you know?
I think it's got to be up around 30 something thousand, 34, 36,000, including, I guess, all of our airline pilots and general aviation pilots together. But I think, you know, as Shawn, is something I've always said, you know, it's always said to me, Ben, we're not enough votes. Love what you do, admire the fact that you stand up for the industry and you're providing a voice on these issues, but we don't have the votes as an industry. No, we don't. We don't have enough votes if you just take the actual direct industry participants. But we all know people. And what have we seen taking place across the last 12 months? There is a growing awareness that in many other industries, many other sectors, many other areas of life, a failure of government, a failure of ministers to adequately control their portfolios and to guide their agencies and to guide their authorities. There are other areas where people are growing just as frustrated as we are. And the best way that we can help our industry is to share as much content as we can and encourage people, spend a few moments and learn a little bit about how there are a lot of similarities. Because, you know, as someone has rightfully put in here today, they're saying in the comments here, you know, AOPA, Warbirds, SAAA, RA, everyone needs to unite. And I absolutely agree with that. Shawn, you and I have had so much conversation around that. Yep. We absolutely believe that the other industry bodies need to join with AOPA and really stand up on these issues. And let me say that every time, oh, Ben, we've got to be careful. I'll talk to these industry bodies. Oh, we have to be very careful. Careful of what? Oh, we're worried. We agree with you, but we're worried. If we stand up and we're seen, we'll be targeted. Well, we're all targeted.
Yeah, and I think that's, yeah, but
we're all targeted, but we have to stand up.
Yeah, well, I definitely understand their concern. And I think, you know, I unfortunately think those concerns are valid. Yeah, it is. I think it is a little bit risky to stick your neck out there.
Well, it's sad. Okay, final question for tonight. We'll start with Mary. We obviously now have applications closed for the Director of Aviation Safety position for CASA. And whilst we don't know who the applicants are, obviously the board, the way that the whole process works is the board will be sifting through those applications and it will put forward some recommendations to the minister, and the minister will obviously make a decision based on the recommendations. What do you think are the key attributes that this board, the CASA board, should be looking at in making this selection?
That's a really interesting question, Ben. And just before I answer it, I'd like to just reinforce what you said on behalf of the industry and these live streams and the catalyst that they're giving to all sectors of the industry and confidence to individuals to finally have some hope that they can have their voice heard. This forum, this platform of being able to live stream and listen to real industry participants expressing their frustration, their concerns, their experiences, and the impact of years and years of battling to try and do the right thing. I think this needs to be identified. We aren't the rogues out there. We're not the baddies who are trying to break the rules, that are bucking at a system that's, you know, because we don't want to participate in the rules. We genuinely want to have clear, concise regulation that gives us some framework to understand how we move our businesses forward. That's what people are asking for, certainty in the regulation. And we will be more than happy to work with the regulator if they can just listen to our concerns. So now I'm off my soapbox.
Okay, Mary, just move your camera a little bit because we're getting a slice of your head.
Oh, that's okay. That's not bad. My battery's running out, so I'm just trying to manipulate it. To answer your question, I've actually written a letter to the board myself outlining exactly those concerns. And concerns that I did express to the board, and I asked them to give really deep consideration to, is to appoint a leader. And I say that very definitively, a leader that will lead this organisation through a reform process that this industry desperately needs with a sense of urgency. A leader that will understand how to implement cultural change within the organisation, to start working again with the industry, and to get this industry, this vital industry that supports so many different sectors right across the nation, to get it back on its feet. Please appoint a leader that understands what regulations will be required to achieve exactly what we've spoken about tonight. So they're probably the two key things that I would appeal to every one of those board members, every one of those panel members who are making this decision. This is a pivotal turning point in the industry of Australian aviation. And I don't believe I'm being dramatic by saying that. I genuinely believe, after speaking to many of my colleagues in the industry, that this is the last ditch attempt to make the necessary change. Because if we don't achieve a good positive change, you'll see so many more people walking away from the industry. And that's a real tragedy.
Shawn, your perspective.
Yeah, I actually agree quite a lot with Mary, and I think that that's a really interesting thought process in terms of needing a leader, and in not a leader obviously is somebody that is capable of making decisions that may be contrary to what they think that the rank and file might be thinking about. Somebody that might be able to go against sort of the entrenched system if they can find, if there is justification for it. And again, I think that's what we've all been asking for, is to, as you said, Ben, let's see the safety case for these regulations. Let's see why we're doing it, not just because this is a big organization and this is the direction that we've always been headed, or not because we've asked people inside the organization and this is what they think. I think that, as Mary said, I think that a true leader would be able to look at the case, look at the situations independently, and then not as a dictator, go then and just say this is what we're going to do, but then to be able to go to the rank and file and say, look, this is the direction that I think we should be going. This is why I think we should be going this way, and lead CASA in a more GA friendly direction, rather than necessarily trying to force things in that direction. Lead them in that direction based on actual facts and safety cases.
Look, absolutely. And I think that you both have really covered so many of the key points. And the only thing that I would add to this is that I think that the selection process, obviously it's going to fall on the board. They're going to look through a whole bunch of CVs and resumes on this issue. But what haven't we seen? This is a really, as Mary said, this is actually a very instrumental time in the history of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And I think in the years to come, we will look back at this moment and we will all agree that this was actually a major moment in time for our industry, as to whether they actually finally get the idea that we can't sustain another 10 years of this, or whether they accept that we can't and there's a real genuine shift forward. But what I would really note is what we haven't seen. There really has been no effort by the board to engage with the industry to understand who is the type of person we need running the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. What are the feelings and the reflections of the aviation industry itself, and what does the aviation industry see as the priorities? Now, we right now are doing exactly that in effect. We're having this engagement. The technology is there. This could very well have been in place. There could have been holding information sessions where Tony Matthews, instead of calling me up and accusing our guests of being half truth givers and on some kind of vendetta to damage CASA, What Tony could have done is Tony could have sat in this chair and joined me for an interview. We could have talked about his perspective on the industry. We could have talked about how he sees general aviation going forward, or he could have engaged with the industry and has sought pilots and aircraft owners and aviation businesses to put their comments in so that he is able to take away firsthand.
Absolutely. And also, I think, Ben, that it is important that we proactively make that invitation to him to come on with us and have the opportunity to give us the other half of the story. If our members are only giving one half of the story, then we would love to have the opportunity to have somebody that has the other half to give us the other half, so that our members can actually make a decision on their own as to where the truth lies.
Well, Shawn, what I'll do, obviously you're my boss, so I'll take that as a direct instruction. But what I will do tomorrow is I'll extend an invitation to Tony Matthews, who's chairman of CASA, to join us for a panel discussion, and let's see if he accepts that invitation. And if he does accept the invitation, let's hear from Tony as to how he sees the challenges facing his organisation and what he sees are the priorities in selecting a new DAS, because I think it is important. I think that we as the industry deserve the opportunity to hear this.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, I think it is really important to have a respectful discussion regarding these issues. I think both sides of this can approach this from a positive standpoint. And I think in the end, that we probably really all want the same thing. We all want to be safe while we're flying. I think that the main thing is that there needs to be a little bit of a reality check as to exactly how safe we can be and still be able to take advantage of the flexibility that GA gives us. Obviously one of the main reasons that people, other than the fact that it's fun, but people fly small aircraft because it gives them flexibility. And if we take the flexibility away and we make things, we legislate things to the point where we're following airline type regulations, we've destroyed that flexibility and probably taken a lot of the fun out of it as well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening and giving up your time. I appreciate it. I know that our members appreciate it. I know the industry appreciates it. Mary, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Shawn, thank you. And thank you to everybody who provided some comments this evening. We will make this a regular occurrence. I think, Shawn, there's a real value in AOPA engaging in this way. And I think that there's some extreme value that we add to the industry in helping cultivate conversation and discussion. And I certainly will be looking forward to doing a few more of these with you over the coming weeks. And Mary, there's always an open invitation for you to participate. Don't hesitate, reach out and let us know if you'd like to join again. And with that, thank you everybody for tonight's session. And we will be back to everyone again next Tuesday with our next guest. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.